Okay, so my name is Tatiana Mironova, for those who doesn't know, and today we will have a session about the lesson planning. In the next 30 minutes, we will have a look with you at some lesson planning strategies, and maybe we will have a look with you at more global understanding of a lesson plan, what that is, and how we can actually make this process a little bit more interesting and maybe challenging for us. During the session, you are more than welcome to type your questions in the chat box. I have the chat box open, so I will be looking there, and if I have time and if the question fits the part of the session, I will answer the question. Those questions which don't fit right here and right now, I will answer at the end of the session, okay? So let's start with the lesson planning. And what we will do today is we'll actually look at the principle and strategies of lesson design, but from the point of view of art, from art perspective. And for that, a quote by Scott Thornberry will help us a lot, because I think that's genius. He said that good lesson shares features with good films because they have plot, theme, rhythm, flow, and the sense of the ending. Sounds great, isn't it? So all of us, we are kind of directors who create lesson, and each of the lesson is like movie that we create. That is why we'll have a look at with you at 4 features right now and how these features can be understood in the lesson planning design. They are plot, theme, rhythm, and sense of an ending. Let's start with the first one, which is a plot. I do have my notes, so sometimes I will be looking down so that I don't forget what I wanted to tell you. So when we talk about the plot, it's very important for us to understand the difference between a story and a plot. Because when we talk about the story, that's a sequence of events. But when we talk about a plot, that's a consequence. That's kind of consequential staging of events. That's why if we talk about a class and a lesson design, what we are aiming to is consequential staging. Because in this case, we have this internal consistency of the class. And there is a coherence. It means that each stage of a lesson serves to develop some argument, like some thing that we want to achieve at the end of the class. Though I think when I was a newbie teacher, and that is one thing that I observe when I go to some novice teacher classes, that at the beginning, we still tend to have more sequential staging, when it's just sequence of activities, sometimes just notion related activities. With experience, we start understanding that lesson is one whole, one piece, and we are trying to have link between all the stages. We try to have this cohesion and in general coherence. That is why, as well as in a movie, in the lesson we have a plot, and it's a consequence of actions. And one more thing that I would like to tell when we talk about the plot, that each plot, it needs some complication. In the movies, you might remember that we always have a climax, something difficult that heroes or characters from the movies need to overcome. The same thing we need to have in the class. We need to have this complication, something challenging that students, that our learners have to resolve. Because without this challenge, without this complication, sometimes class can be seen as a little bit deficient one. So it's too easy for students, and there is no sense of achievement. We will talk about this when we get to stage number 4, but that is something for us to keep in mind. So plot, consequence of actions, and something challenging for students to resolve. Let's move on to the next part, which is a theme. Basically, theme, that is what the whole lesson is about. It's a topic of the class. And I personally believe that there is no other single stage in the lesson planning more important than a theme, because it creates the sense of wholeness of the class. That is the consistency of the class. And again, looking back at my early years as a teacher, I believe I crammed my class with different activities to present and practice some grammar structures. And I didn't really think about the topic of the lesson, about the theme of the class. So it was really different things that we did at the beginning, like reading and everything else, reading or listening. And then we had practice activities which were not related in topic. And for students, it is a great cognitive load. It's really difficult for them to perceive this information. That is why one theme of the class, one topic of the class helps to kind of make it easier for students to perceive this information and preserve the sense of wholeness of a class. Okay, I won't delve in a lot of details over here. So let's move on to the next thing that I would like to talk about, which is the rhythm. So basically, like in any good class, there should be a rhythm, and this rhythm should change once in a while. And what is more important, it should be not very obvious for students. Learners shouldn't realize that something is changing. And with easy to and fro activities, you create this rhythmic movement. Let me explain to you what I mean this to and fro. It means like back and forward. So what that can be, it can be questions from the teachers, answers from the students, questions, answers, that is movement, yes? Or it can be prompt response drills that we use, or transformation drills, any kind of drills basically. Or it can be change of form of work that we use during our classes, teacher-centered, group work, peer work, individual work. So it also creates the change, the rhythm of the class. Or it can be work on receptive skills, productive skills. We change the work, we change the rhythm. Or some activities with focus on the form, some activities focused on the meaning of some grammar structures or functional language. Or last example that I have for you, it can be activities with high degree of concentration for students and activities with lower degree of concentration for students. So with the help of these techniques, when we change the types of activities during our class, we create this sense of rhythm. And let's move on to the first part that I have here. So we covered with you plot, theme, rhythm. And as far as you remember, the last one is the sense of ending that we have during our classes. So as any good movie, our lessons and lesson plans, they have beginning, they have development, and they have the end. Hopefully it's a happy end, because what we are aiming at is to achieve our ILO, which means intended learning outcomes or intended learning objectives. Why I call them, not me actually, why they are called intended learning objectives is because that's what we hope our students to achieve at the end of the class. But always remember that we do not teach a lesson plan. We teach students, we teach learners, and it never goes according to the plan. There are some things that are different. They have questions, they don't understand some things. And at this point, you have to change the lesson plan a little bit. You have to be flexible. That's why they are called intended learning outcomes. That's what I want to achieve at the end of the class. But sometimes they not always fit with real learning outcomes, what happens in the classroom. But anyway, it's like in the movie, when the more we watch the movie, the more interested we get along the movie. Students, when they're in the class, the more they are involved in the class, the more they are interested at the end in the intended learning outcome. So what we achieved at the end of the class. And I think in the structure of the class, like traditional structure, PPP, presentation, practice, production, like this ending of the class is very suitable, because at the end we have productive stage where they actually produce what we want them to produce, like that is our intended learning outcome. Though it doesn't only suit presentation, practice, production structure of the class. It can also be TTT, task, teach, test, where at the end of the class, they still have this sense of achievement when they improve the performance of the repeated task. And remember, when we were talking about the plot, I told that it's very important to have this challenge. There's something complicated for them to achieve. So that is the sense of an ending. That is the sense of achievement that students have when they realize that they managed to overcome this challenge, overcome this difficulty, and actually they learned something and they can do something better. That's why, as far as we started talking about intended learning outcomes, that's interesting to have a look at such notion as constructive alignment. When we talk about constructive alignment in the terms of the class, we mean that there are 3 stages in a lesson planning that are aligned, quite obvious at this moment. 3 stages, they're aligned. So let's have a look at the stages. The stages are the following. We have ILO, CA, and AT. One of them we already know, which is ILO. As far as you remember, that is our intended learning outcomes. So let's have a look at what CA and AT stand for. CA, this is the classroom activities. So basically, these are activities that we plan during the class that will help us to achieve this intended learning outcomes. And we also have AT, that is assessment task. So that is the task, I think usually it's at the end of the lesson, where we kind of assess whether students managed to achieve these learning objectives or they didn't manage to achieve those. And in order to align these 3 stages, there are 3 simple questions that you need to ask yourselves. Okay, so 3 stages, 3 questions that we ask. And the questions are the following. For intended learning outcomes, what do I want my students to learn at the end of the class? Classroom activities. What method and activities will I use to achieve those aims? So here we're planning not only the activities itself, but maybe approaches and methods that we can use. And when we're talking about assessment task, that is, what assessment task will I use to check if those objectives were achieved or not? I do understand that at this moment, it's quite theoretical one. That is why let's have a little bit more practical look at all of these 3 things. And what I've decided to do is to use our Notes by Green Forest book and take one of the classes from Notes by Green Forest and have a look how these 3 stages can be aligned according to one of the classes that we have there. So what I know I have some typos on the slide, so I have seen those, no worries. So I decided to have a look at the intermediate class, and that was class 3.2, One Coffee to Go. Let's start with intended learning outcomes, what I want my students to achieve at the end of the class. Usually, it is the can-do statements that we have for each of the class. And that is what makes it easier for us as teachers. We can have a look at the can-do statement. And I understand that I want my students to achieve this at the end of the class. In our case, the can-do, learners can order food and ask questions about this food, about dishes that they ordered. So that's what I want my students to achieve. Classroom activities. So what I will use to achieve those intended learning outcomes. It can be some vocabulary. Obviously, vocabulary will be related to the topic food, if I need it. Again, I know my students. Functional language that will have focus on the phrases and chunks that students need to use to order food. It can be listening model. So it's actually the model for them to listen where people order some food at a restaurant. And if necessary, we can include the pronunciation, and it can be work on the intonation, or maybe there is some connected speech features, anything, but still related to the phrases and functional language, which is used for intended learning outcomes. So everything leads at the end to the task, and that is going to be an assessment task where I will check if my students can do that or they can't. In our case, in assessment task, it's learners role play a situation at the restaurant, and I assess if students manage to make an order and find out information about this order. My piece of advice at this point is when you plan how you will assess this intended learning outcomes, try to come up with some specific achievements that you want to observe. For example, students use minimum 3 phrases to express their opinion, to make an order. So the more specific your criteria, like assessment criteria is, the easier it is for you to assess if your students can do that or they can't. So that is like a simple example of how you can constructively align the stages of your class and make sure that it is everything is logically connected. And what can help you at this point is lesson planning right from the heart. That was in the quiz in the morning today, and you had 3 options to choose from. It was really interesting to see what options you have decided to choose. Anyway, when we're talking about lesson planning from the heart, we'll find out right now what that means. I would say that it is a global rather than linear approach to conceiving and planning your lessons and designing your lessons. Anyway, it's up to you how you construct your lesson plan, but I do believe that planning right from the heart or planning from the heart can help you a little bit. So let's have a look what that actually is and how that works. First thing that you need is a heart. Let me have a sip. Your heart, that is the focus of the class. That is the most important thing that you will have during the class. And in our case, the heart of the class is the communicative activity, because I hope that all of us, we teach using communicative approach, and therefore at the end of the lesson, we want to achieve some communicative objective, communicative outcome. As an example, just as an example, let's have communicative objective. My students can order lunch in a restaurant. My notes. When I start planning all the activities that I plan to achieve this communicative objective, I plan around this heart. What will help my students to achieve this communicative objective? I can start with leading. For leading, we can take different types of tasks. It can be discussions. It can be maybe vocabulary tasks when they match food or dishes and countries, whatever. It can be some reading or listening. It can already be a listening model of what you want them to achieve at the end of the class. That is your leading, which obviously is connected with ordering lunch at the restaurant. The next things that we plan are presentation and work with the language. For presentation, it depends on what topic you have. If we have order lunch in a restaurant, the presentation here is of a functional language, what phrases and chants they need. And then we can have work with the language. We can have a work with this functional language. If it is grammar, you will work with grammar, different practice tasks, for example, on form, on the meaning. If you have vocabulary as a presentation and language for the class, you work here with language and vocabulary, with vocabulary as a part of the language. But again, it's all related to the topic and the language that will help them to order lunch in a restaurant. The next one, we might have a pronunciation part in our class, which can be aimed at segmental and super segmental features. When we talk about segmental features, that can be worked with different sounds. For example, in the vocabulary list, you see that one sound is repeated over and over, like th sound or schwa sound or w. And you decide to pay attention and drill it a little bit with your students because they will be using these words during the communicative task. Or it can be super segmental features. These are connected speech, intonation, rhythm, sentence stress. And again, all of these features, they are present in the functional language or in the grammar or in the vocabulary. And clearly, once you discuss that with your students, you need a drill. Different kinds of drill can be applicable here. That is transformation drill, backward drill, disappearance drill. I'm sure you have your own favorite type of drill, but that will help students to get ready for this communicative activity. They will create this neuron paths in their brain, and it will be much easier for them to retrieve these phrases and this information from their brain. And then the last part, they role play this situation in a restaurant where they are using all this knowledge that they have, like all this information that you have covered with them. Functional language, pronunciation, work with language, they have seen the model or they have read about it. So that is one of the examples. When I have the functional language, how I can work with it and how I can build my work around it. As an example, let's have a look at another class. In the, oh, I have forgotten one more stage. I'm terribly sorry. That's why I have forgotten, because I didn't look at my notes. Once you conducted the role play, you need to give the feedback. I do remember that Kate last semester conducted a wonderful, I think it was training or webinar on working with emergent language and giving feedback. And wonderful idea that she told us about was sandwich feedback. When they conduct a role play with one partner, you listen, you monitor, you note down their mistakes or errors or some things that they do really good. Then once they conducted the role play, you give them feedback. Okay, guys, that was good. You managed to do that and that. Pay attention to these points. Then you change their partners and you give them the chance to conduct the same activity one more time. Why is it important to do that? Because they have a chance to correct whatever was incorrect right here and right now. And they see this improvement. And that is the sense of achievement. And that is the sense of an ending of the class. I learned it, I improved it, I can do that now. Okay, so that is ideally the last part of the class. Now we are ready to have a look at one more example of the class. This time it's going to be not the functional language, but it's going to be grammar class. And I've got all the stages right here. So I will talk you through the stages and I will use my annotate function to help you to understand where I am. So the aim of the class, the communicative objective, students can tell an anecdote about a nightmare journey. For that communicative activity, we usually try to have 15-20 minutes, right? Just enough time for them to actually conduct this communicative activity. I will start with the anecdote where I, as a teacher, tell an anecdote and students, they can stop me to ask questions about it. So that is like natural conversation, because when we tell some stories or anecdotes from our lives, that's not just a monologue. Our friends or whoever we are talking to, they ask questions. That's what we are trying to do here. Students can ask me questions. Having done that, I want to present to them past simple. I give them the written story and ask them to underline all the examples of past simple. And then I present to them what that is, how we can elicit them, it's guided discovery, different methods and techniques can be used over here. After this, we have work with the language. In our case, as far as the grammar, there's going to be something like fill in the gaps with past simple, just for them to recall the regular verbs. I can have their sentences with different forms, questions, negatives, whatever it is. After this, ideally, I would have a pronunciation slot, because we have this ed ending that can be pronounced in different ways. So I will practice and drill it a little bit with the students. Then I can have a drill. It's like kind of controlled practice, because I want to drill them to drill different types of sentences, questions, negatives, positive, paying attention to the ed ending. So that is the drill of all of the language. Having done that, we've got our main communicative activity, telling the anecdote. Students can work in groups or in pairs, and they actually using all this knowledge about past simple, about ending ed, having heard the model from me, now they are able to perform this activity on their own. After this, we can have correction slot where students in pairs, for example, they correct their own mistakes. Let's imagine that during the communicative activity, I was making notes and I just presented to them the sentences or notes that I have taken. And in pairs, they can correct them on their own. And they will just conduct the feedback. Yes, that was correct. Here we correct it. Nice. Ideally, I will give them the chance to perform the same activity one more time if we have sandwich feedback, but with different partners. So they pay attention to the mistakes that they have made before and now try not to make those. And then my favorite part of the class that we can also include is class reflection. We need to give them an opportunity to reflect on what they have just done, to pay attention to their weaknesses and strengths, what they managed to do, what was difficult, what they can improve on. It can be conducted in groups or in pairs or even open class, where you kind of summarize, okay, guys, what have we learned today? What was the most difficult for you? What you knew before and what you learned today during this class. So that kind of helps to structure the information. I can talk about this for the next 30 minutes, but I won't do that. That's why if you're interested in different ways how to conduct class reflections, you can email me. I will send the email at the end of the workshop in the chat, and I will send you the document that is a Google Doc with different options how to conduct class reflections. Okay, that was 2 examples of planning a lesson from the heart. The correct answer for the quiz was, when we plan the lesson from the heart, we put a communicative activity as a focus of the class. That is something I want my students to achieve. That is intended learning outcome. Everything that I plan around it is a class activities that help us to achieve this learning outcome. And at the end of the lesson, while completing this task, that is our assessment task, I check if they managed to do that, if they actually achieved these objectives, or we still need to work on some of them. So that is a little bit more global view on planning or designing your classes. Okay, that was one of the basic information about class and the most important things that we need to keep in mind when we're designing a class. And now I will tell you about a few elusive lesson planning components, something which is not obligatory to include in your lesson plans, but I will tell you what it is and how it can help you. And if you're interested, you have 2 options. You can either Google, or you can ask me again, email me and ask me more information about it, so I can actually send you an example of what you can do with that. So one of them, it's learner's profile. We have conducted quite a few trainings already on catering students' needs. And learner's profile can help you to understand your students better and their needs better. The way I do is the following. I include their weaknesses, strengths, clearly, yes, while observing the students, I know what they have problems with, what their strengths are. I can put here how they behave in the classroom, something that I can anticipate them in the further classrooms to do, and some general info. I will put it this way. First 2 columns, weaknesses and strengths, they help me to understand the learners better. As for the last 2 columns in the classroom and general info, that is super useful for substitute teachers. Very often we ask teachers to substitute our classes, and they come into the classroom full of new students and they have no idea what to do with them. So having this learning profile helps them to imagine what kind of classroom they're going to have, what they can pay attention to, and what problems they might have in this classroom. So that this 2 last columns, like in the classroom and general info, might be very come in handy. Okay, that is one of the elusive stages. The next elusive component that I have is language analysis. Actually, I prepare this language analysis before the classes because it helps me a lot. In what way? In the first column, I usually put the target language that we are going to learn with our students. For each of the target language, we have meaning, form, pronunciation, always. And then I predict what potential difficulties students might have with this precise target language, with this functional language chunk or with this vocabulary item. And then in the last column, I put what I can possibly do to make it easier for students to perceive this information, especially when we have this problem that we anticipate. Over here, I have two examples. The first example, it's functional language. And you can see that, for example, I have here two phrases, how about, what about? And students are familiar with these phrases. What potential difficult might be is that they might forget that we use gerund after that. So that is something that I will pay their attention to while presenting the language. It helps me to distinguish, okay, I need to pay attention to this. If I have, for example, vocabulary, like over here, I have blended learning, face shields, the difficulties can be different. It can be with the words. Students might not understand what blended is. And in this case, I plan, okay, blended. I will give example of a blender, like mixing things, blended learning, offline, online. So it helps them to understand what it is. Or it can be pronunciation. If some students have troubles with pronouncing some sounds like sh and so on and so forth, I can pay attention to these sounds while presenting this vocabulary or this functional language. Again, that helps me a lot just to be sure in the language that I'm going to present during the class. And before the class, I know for sure what I will pay attention to and what difficulties my students might have while learning this language. So as an experiment, I do really suggest you try this language analysis stage component. Okay, this component is not elusive. I would say that everybody who plans a lesson should have this one. These are your objectives, your aims for the class. And aims can be different. It can be skills objective or communicative objective or language objective. So something that you want your students to achieve. For one class, we can have not one objective, we can have a few objectives. That's why we say that there is always a main objective. I will remind you that we use communicative approach. So in our case, the main objective is communicative objective. And then as a sub-aim, we can have skills objective, develop students listening for gist skill. That is sub-aim. Or pronunciation objective, practice sentence stress with my students. That's not the main aim of the class, but it's sub-aim. But all of them, they are linked to your heart. All of them, they are linked to your communicative objective, to your intended learning outcome. That's why every time before you actually start creating class activities, start with the aim and your sub-aim, what I want my students to achieve. These are your intended learning outcomes. While designing classroom activities, what might help you is potential problems and solutions column. In this column, what I write is what problems I can have with timing or with the design of the activity or with grouping, or maybe some tricky language, or it can be anything. You know your students better and you can anticipate these problems. For example, if I know my students and I know that for some specific task, they might lack this vocabulary, and that is the problem. They might not have enough vocabulary. My solution will be to monitor, note down what vocabulary they were lacking, and then as a feedback, put it on the board, because they will need it at the end of the class for the communicative activity, so they will have it in front of them. Or for example, I'm planning the activity and I need 8 people. The problem might be that there are not 8, but there are 7, and I cannot put them in pairs. So what will be the solution? Who will be working in the group of 3? That's a nice thing to plan it beforehand. So you know, okay, this person or these people will be working in group of 3 because they work better in group than in pair. So that is different things that we can anticipate. I think one of the most popular and widespread problems, it's timing. What if I don't have enough time to conduct my communicative activity? So that is, again, you can plan solution. Okay, if after the drill, I see that I don't have enough time to conduct pronunciation stage and communicative activity, I need to sacrifice something. What will we sacrifice? Pronunciation or communicative activity? What is our aim? Communicative activity. That is why we can sacrifice the survey pronunciation, but still conduct the communicative activity, because that is our heart, that is the focus of the class. And then pronunciation you can cover maybe during some other classes, because pronunciation, it happens and appears everywhere. It's like everywhere, believe me. Okay, another elusive component is these are feedback slots. I love planning them beforehand after each of the activity. What will I actually do? Let's imagine that I have speaking activity with my students. That is leading, discussion, their favorite types of food and dishes, where they like eating, and so on and so forth. I will have a feedback on emerging language. And I will have a feedback focused on topic related vocabulary. Again, something that they will use in the communicative activity. If necessary, I can pay attention to the focus, to the future forms, because that is something that we learned with them. There are questions related to it, so I will pay attention if they use it or not. So I can also give feedback on their background knowledge. Then what I like doing, it's planning how I will conduct this feedback form. Whether it's going to be on the board, just sentences and students correct the sentences, or it's going to be open class when I read the sentences and I ask them to correct them. Or maybe I want to mix. I put on the board correct and incorrect sentences, and I ask them just to find the incorrect ones. So it's very, that is really useful to plan it beforehand, because you don't have to think about it during the class. You already have the plan. Now you just monitor and pick up the emerging language. And don't forget about timing. Very often we neglect the time that we spend for feedback, but you might have noticed that feedback, it's not 1 minute. It takes more. It can be 3 minutes. Sometimes it can be up to 5 minutes if they start asking questions. So always, when you're planning, consider that feedback time and feedback slot, so you know how much time you will spend on it, and if you will have enough time for the communicative activity or not. And I think I have one of the last stages, components that I want to tell you about. Yes, which is differentiation. What we mean by differentiation is the following. We have different students. The most popular differentiation is like fast finishers. Some students are slower, some students are fast finishers. So at this point, you plan, okay, what I will do if they finish the activity faster. So what will it be? You will ask them to discuss the questions, or you will give them the drill, or you will ask them to help weaker students, and so on and so forth. One more differentiation that you can pay attention to is at your final stage. For example, stage number 4, that is the role play. That is where they will be actually conducting the communicative activity. All of our students, they can achieve different, they can achieve aims, but to the different extent. Stronger students, they will use 5 chunks and 7 phrases that they cover during the class. Weaker students, it will be difficult for them. They can use only 3 and 4, but that's enough for them. They don't need to use all of them 7, yes? And in this point, you differentiate your outcomes. I want Victoria and Yaroslava to use 7 phrases, and I will pay attention if they use them or not. But I want Tanya and Karina to use 3 or 4 phrases. And if they use more, I'll just pay attention to during the feedback slot. I will say, Ladis, well done, you managed to use more, that's amazing. So that is like some positive feedback that can be useful. So don't forget that our students, they can achieve our aims differently, and we expect them to achieve them a little bit differently. Okay, that is all that I wanted to tell you about. I know that it might have been a little bit fast, but let's summarize and recap everything that we have just talked about. So we started with a class as a movie. Rhythm, plot, theme, the sense of an ending. We talked about constructive alignment, 3 stages. Intended learning outcomes, classroom activities that help to achieve it, assessment task where we check if they achieved it or not. Lesson planning from the heart, global perspective or global view on lesson design and lesson planning. And elusive components, that it's something for you to experiment with, that is your continuous professional development. We are always trying to improve our teaching. And with the help of these elusive components, we are improving our lesson planning. I will have a look at the questions that you typed here, and let's see if I can answer those. Sometimes we don't achieve happy ending. Yes, I do agree. Sometimes we don't achieve happy ending. That is why, while planning, you can try problem solution and just pay attention to the problem with timing. Keep this timing in mind. Okay, if I don't have time to achieve this happy ending, the communicative aim, I will sacrifice this and this, for example. But I do agree, all of the classes are different. Sometimes we just, something happens that we can't achieve this intended learning outcome. That's the reason why we call it intended. Okay, if lesson is a piece of art, might it be be a little bit changed? For instance, if we have really tough grammar, can students have more practice at home first? Yes, of course, the way you design your class is absolutely different. We have already watched with you lecture and workshop on flipped classrooms. And I personally do love using flipped classroom, especially in the online environment, because it helps students to, first of all, get ready for the topic, just to read and do some practice. And then during the class, you will have more time to focus on your heart of the class, on your communicative objective. And that's great, because that's what we want them to do and achieve. And again, if you compare it to the to movies, quite often we have reproduction of books in the movies, and a lot of people read books before they watch the movie. It's almost the same here. We can give them a book to read before they watch the movie, before they come to the class and they actually do something there. Let's move on. Please send the reflection file. Yes, pronunciation, that is, I call it prawn stage or prawn slot or pronunciation slot. I might have called it the other word, but sorry for that. I'm so sorry for that. Have you ever had problems with creating bridges between stages to maintain the same? Oh, of course, during my first or maybe 2 years of teaching, that was really challenging to create all of these bridges. But with time, it gets better. It's just experience. The more you teach, the better you understand what bridges you might create in between the tasks. And then what I always tell to all of the teachers, experiment. Try different ones, try different approaches, try different bridges. See what works, reflect on it, change it the next time if you need. But of course, I think all of us sometimes they can have problems with bridges and how to change. If you do have problems, ask your peers in the staff room. Guys, I have this 2 stages. I have no idea how to connect them. Usually somebody comes up with ideas, or they just trigger some ideas that help you. That's what I usually do when I have problems with bridges. Okay. I will stop sharing. Where is the stop share button? Oh, here it is. If you have any other questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask. In the chat box, I'm sending my email. I have seen that somebody has already asked Lisa. I think that's my Lisa. So Lisa, I will send to you the link to the document with reflection activities. If somebody else needs this document, just drop a line to my email. I will just send you a link. Sorry, I'm not prepared and I cannot put link right now over here, but I will definitely send it to you. If you have no other questions, I wish you a wonderful Friday. Sorry for taking it a little bit longer than I hoped for. I hope this webinar was useful for you, and have wonderful movies with your students. Bye, guys.
Thank you, Tanya. Bye-bye.